The air in the Finch Estate's grand ballroom was heavy with the smell of money and ego. Light from crystal chandeliers bounced off a floor so polished you could see the smug faces of the city's wealthiest 1%. And at the center of it all stood Mr. Alastair Finch, a man whose fortune was matched only by his arrogance. He raised a hand, and the orchestra and chatter faded. A cruel little smile played on his lips. His eyes scanned the room and landed on a woman standing by the service entrance, holding a tray of empty glasses. That was Amara, his maid. Alastair's voice boomed across the room, full of that phony charm only the very rich can pull off. "Friends," he said, "our orchestra is wonderful, but the evening is missing. Well, a little spontaneous flair. I'm sure my maid can entertain us. Dance for us, Amara." Snickers rippled through the crowd. Every eye in the room turned on Amara, her face a frozen mask of shock and humiliation. This millionaire thought he was about to have a laugh at his maid's expense. He had no idea she was about to put him, and all his wealthy friends in their place. So, how did she end up here? What happened next is the part you won't want to miss. In this house of gold, Amara was basically a ghost. She moved through the lavish halls with a quiet efficiency, completely invisible to the family she served. She polished silver she could never own, cleaned rooms she could never sleep in, and was treated less like a person and more like a tool. To the Finch family, she wasn't Amara. She was just the help. Alastair, especially, seemed to enjoy reminding her of her place. For him, cruelty was a kind of sport. He'd leave messes on purpose, talk about her like she wasn't even in the room, and make casual, cutting remarks about her race and position. Tonight was his big annual gala, the social event of the year. Amara's job was to stay in the shadows and clean up after the rich, but Alastair, a few glasses of champagne in and desperate for an audience, had a different idea. He'd heard his wife mention once that Amara was graceful on her feet while she worked, and that tiny seed of information grew into this monstrous public demand. "Dance for us," he repeated, louder this time, clearly enjoying how much it made her squirm. The guests, like vultures in designer clothes, joined in. "Oh, do it!" a woman dripping in diamonds sneered. "This ought to be good for a laugh," another man slurred to his friend. They saw her uniform, her dark skin, the tray in her hands, and wrote the whole script in their heads. She'd be clumsy, awkward, and give them a great story to tell. They were waiting for her to fail. Amara's heart was hammering against her ribs. Every part of her wanted to run, to just disappear back into the kitchen. But she couldn't. She desperately needed this job. Her younger brother had a mountain of medical bills, and this job, as awful as it was her only lifeline. Refusing meant getting fired, but accepting meant letting them shred her spirit for sport. She looked at their faces, the cold eyes, the mocking smiles. Then she looked at Alastair, who looked like he'd already won. He thought he had her cornered, and he was right. She was trapped. So, with a deep breath that felt like the quiet before a hurricane, she set the tray down on a table. She straightened her spine, and a fire they couldn't possibly understand lit up in her eyes. "As you wish, sir," she said. Her voice was just a whisper, but it echoed across the silent room with the force of a promise. Alastair waved a hand at the orchestra leader. "Give her something simple, a waltz, maybe." He winked at a nearby guest. "Let's see if she can even handle that." The insult was obvious. What would a simple maid know about a waltz? Confused but commanded, the orchestra started to play. The opening notes of a sweeping classic waltz filled the ballroom. The crowd pushed in a little, phones already out, ready to record the disaster. Amara stood alone in the middle of that huge, polished floor, a single figure in a hostile sea. She didn't move for the first few bars of music. The whispers got louder. "See? She's frozen." "The poor thing has no idea what to do." Alistair crossed his arms, a smug grin plastered on his face. This was perfect. And then, everything changed. Amara closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, the maid was gone. An artist stood in her place. She took one single step, not a shuffle, but the poised, deliberate step of a performer taking the stage. She lifted her chin, and her entire posture shifted from timid to commanding. Suddenly, her simple black and white uniform didn't look like a symbol of servitude. It looked like a choice. They all saw a maid. What they didn't see was the little girl who had traded her childhood for worn-out ballet slippers. They didn't see the years of brutal training at a top academy, where she was the scholarship student who outshone every privileged girl there. They didn't see the principal ballerina whose career was destroyed by the same accident that took her parents and left her drowning in debt, with a brother to care for. They didn't see the dreams she had to bury just to survive. They saw a servant, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Amara began to dance. She started with a fluid curtsy to the orchestra, a small sign of respect that shocked them into playing with a new level of passion. Then she moved. She didn't just dance a waltz, she became it. Her feet barely seemed to touch the floor as she glided through the steps with breathtaking technical perfection. Her turns were flawless pirouettes. Her arms flowed with a liquid grace that could only come from thousands of hours of practice. This wasn't the clumsy stumbling they'd all been expecting. This was world-class ballet, woven seamlessly into a ballroom dance. If you believe that you can never judge a book by its cover, and that real worth has nothing to do with a price tag, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. The sneering whispers died instantly, replaced by a wave of stunned, open-mouthed silence. The phones were still out, but now they were recording in total awe. The woman in diamonds now had a hand clamped over her mouth. The man who predicted a laugh was standing ramrod straight, his drunken haze completely gone, utterly captivated. Amara kept dancing, lost in her own world. The music was her partner, the floor was her kingdom. She launched into a series of turns so complex they would challenge a seasoned professional, her body a perfect picture of strength and elegance. With every step, she was taking back the pieces of herself that hardship and prejudice had tried to rip away. This wasn't just a dance, it was a rebellion. It was a silent, screaming declaration of her own value. Alistair Finch's smug grin had melted away, leaving a slack-jawed, horrified gape. His face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. He wanted to make her an object of pity, a joke. Instead, she had transformed into something powerful and beautiful, and in doing so, she had made him look pathetic, petty, and like a complete fool. The joke was on him, and everyone in the room knew it. As the last note of the waltz hung in the air, Amara struck a final graceful pose, head high, chest open, a silent picture of victory. For a long moment there was no sound but the echo of the music. The silence was heavy with shock and a creeping sense of shame from the guests. Then one person started to clap. It wasn't one of Alistair's rich buddies. It was an elderly man in the back, a world-renowned ballet critic who had come as a guest of a guest and had been quiet all night. His applause was slow, deliberate, and loud. Then another person joined in, and another, and in seconds, the ballroom exploded with thunderous applause. It was a sound that was part apology and part pure admiration. They weren't clapping for a maid anymore. They were giving a standing ovation to an artist. Amara slowly relaxed from her pose and, for the first time, really looked at them. There was no fear left in her eyes, only a quiet, unbreakable dignity. She gave a slight, formal bow, the bow of a performer, not a servant. The ballet critic pushed through the crowd, his eyes shining. "My dear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That wasn't a dance. That was a resurrection. I haven't seen passion like that in 20 years. Who are you?" Before she could speak, Alistair, scrambling to get a grip on the situation, stepped in. "She's my maid," he stammered, trying to put her back in her box. The critic didn't even glance at him. He kept his eyes locked on Amara. "A woman with your gift shouldn't be serving drinks," he announced to the entire room. "She should be on the world's greatest stages." He pulled out a business card. "When you're finished with this," he said, waving a hand dismissively at Alistair, "you call me. The world needs to see you dance." Amara took the card. Her fingers closed around it like it was a key. She looked at Alistair, his face a perfect mask of public shame and fury. He had lost. And she hadn't just won, she had risen so far above his petty game that he couldn't touch her. Amara walked out of that ballroom and didn't look back once. She didn't have to. With the critic's help, she auditioned for a major dance company and was almost immediately offered a principal role. Her story became something of a legend. The night a forgotten ballerina reminded an arrogant world what true grace really looks like. This is a reminder that talent can be found in the most unexpected places, and that prejudice only exposes the ugliness of the person who wields it. True class isn't about money or status. It's about the dignity you carry inside you and the respect you show to others. Never let anyone else define your worth. Because sometimes the most stunning victories happen right after someone dares you to fail.